Today's video is all about the Toll Brothers new construction contract. Just a quick introduction on why the contract is so important when buying a new construction home. These contracts are heavily biased in the builder's favor, and that's across the board. And the reality is, there's not a lot you can do about it. Generally, the contracts are nationwide with addendums for different states and communities. And if you really get into the weeds of these contracts, it allows the builder to do just about anything they want. Now, obviously, that's not in their best interest. Customer service is important, but I've seen everything at this point. The contract allows a builder to change the floor plan, change materials, reorient your home. Any number of things can go wrong when you build these homes. Knowing what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do is really important. Also, understanding that these things can happen makes you a more diligent buyer. And in the event that they do need to change a floor plan or change materials, it's really important that you have a voice in any decision making. Scrutinize every decision they make. Don't accept it by default. And if you go into the construction process with that mindset, you will come out ahead. The Toll Brothers contract is split up into 4 sections. You have the main body of the contract, the agreement of sale, which is pretty consistent across the country. You have what are B addendums. B addendums are basically anything that's added to the contract. So just think options, design center, basically where you're spending money. C addendums are addendums where you are subtracting options or credits or monies from the contract. So think closing cost subsidies, incentives, that sort of thing. And finally, you have endorsements. These are all addendums to the contract that are specific to your community, your state, your jurisdiction, and they override any language that's in the agreement of sale. So without further ado, here it is, the contract for a Toll Brothers new construction home. Okay, so we start with the agreement of sale. This highlights the buyer, the seller, the address. The number on the agreement of sale is going to represent the base price of the home plus the lot premium. It does not include structural options or design center options. In this contract, it's a $5,000 lot hold, which reserved a lot for us. And then there is a $111,000 down payment, which is 5% of the base price plus the lot premium. However, there's also an additional promissory note for additional 5% of the base price and lot premium that's included in this contract. And I have another video on how deposits work, but in short, it's 5% of the base price, 5% of the lot premium, 20% of structural options, and 20% of design center options. The mortgage application. Common question I get is there a financing contingency? Or what happens if I don't get approved for a mortgage? So let's see what the contract says. In short, before you sign a contract with Toll Brothers, you will fill out what's called a pre-application worksheet. On that worksheet, you will specify your income, your debt, your assets, your liabilities, maybe most importantly, your source of funds for the down payment. If Toll Brothers thinks that looks okay, they'll move forward with the contract. Now, what you put on that application is actually really important because within 14 days of submitting this contract, you are required to submit an application with TBI Mortgage, the Toll Brothers' own mortgage company. You don't have to use them, but you do need to go through the full application process with them so that they know that they can approve you for a mortgage or not. And within 45 days of the contract, you need to provide a commitment letter from the mortgage broker, whether it's TBI or if TBI can't do it, they may approve you to go to someone else and then use their own commitment letter. But once you get a commitment letter from a mortgage company, whether it's TBI or a Toll approved mortgage company, you are locked in. Then at that point, they start building your house, they pull permits, they dig a hole in the ground, and there is no recourse to cancel the contract should your financial conditions change between then and settlement. And why I mentioned the pre-application worksheet earlier is because in some instances, there may be a scenario where you don't qualify for the mortgage based on your own sort of personal preferences. Let's say you want to keep your existing home, or let's say you have an investment property that you have no intention on selling. If you only qualify with the caveat that you need to sell one of those properties or both properties, and you do not explicitly exempt those homes on your pre-application worksheet as maybe an asset or a property you're not willing to sell in order to qualify, they can still consider you approved for a mortgage with the condition you sell this, maybe your existing primary home. But if you go into the application and you know, hey, I do not want to or intend on selling this piece of property or selling this stock or liquidating these funds, whatever it might be, and you're denied approval because of one of those conditions, then you have the option to void the contract with no penalty. Now, if you go through the entire application process and you act in good faith and within 45 days, TBI or their approved mortgage company is not able to give you an approval or a commitment letter, Toll Brothers has the right to void the contract and return to you your deposits with no penalty. But once you get that commitment letter and you submit that commitment letter to Toll Brothers, after 5 days, you can no longer cancel the contract or walk away without penalty. We'll talk about what those penalties look like here shortly. Closing costs. This is also something that's a little bit different with a new construction home versus a resale home. On a resale home in Virginia, for example, transfer and recordation taxes are customarily split, besides the grantor's tax in Virginia, which is paid for by the seller. However, in a new construction home, it doesn't work that way. So in number 4, it says buyers shall pay for title insurance, survey, and seller's dock prep. So you actually are going to pay for some of their title fees. All recording fees are paid for by the purchaser as well. Here in this contract, they will pay the grantor's tax, but the recordation tax, which is usually split between buyer and seller in a resale transaction, is paid completely by a buyer in this transaction. Here's an instance where there's a hidden fee or a hidden cost or additional cost that you might not be accounting for when you compare this home to a resale home. All right, number 5, title insurance. You have the right to select your own title insurance. If it's required and you don't do your due diligence, the seller has the right to pick one for you. Number 6, default. This paragraph specifies the damages that the builder will be entitled to should you be in default and vice versa. If you as a buyer are in default or you decide to walk away without cause, your entire deposit can be forfeited to the builder, plus the promissory note that you will sign as part of this contract, which is an additional 5% of the base price and lot premium. Not only will you lose the money you already gave them, they can come after you for another 5%. And now if they default on this contract, say they can't deliver the home, they go bankrupt, who the hell knows? They have to give you your money back, and that's the extent of their damages. All right, number 7, approval of seller. So this contract is a little bit different with regards to how contracts usually work. Usually a contract requires signatures from both parties, the buyer and the seller, to be binding. This contract becomes binding once the purchaser signs it. And then this contract gets sent up to corporate, someone in corporate reviews it, signs it, and sends it back, and they have 30 days to do that. So even though you only have the contract signed by yourself, and let's say you change your mind in the next couple of weeks, they go, wait, it's not ratified. In fact, you're saying that this contract is binding based on only your signature. And that's because the sales team, the folks in the office, the ones that send out these documents, don't have any authority to ratify contracts. Number 8 is construction. This says this home will be constructed to the specifications outlined in the plans, worksheets, and brochures as described in these upcoming exhibits. Number 8 says the home will be built to those specifications. Also says that natural materials like marble, wood floors, stone, that sort of thing may present one way in person and a different way on your personal home, just given the nature of natural materials. By default, they don't sod properties, they grade and seed. However, in this contract, you'll see later on where they do actually add sod as part of the contract. Last but not least, the insulation you'll be getting in this home. They specify exactly the R value of insulation you'll get through the property. It's really important to understand if they're insulating a home to minimum standards or if they are exceeding standards. And this is where you'll find that information. Number 9, pre-closing orientation. This says that 5 to 10 days before closing, you'll do a final walkthrough with the builder, identify any defects or issues with the property, and they will work diligently to remedy any issues prior to closing. Number 10, closing. This says they will give you 10-day notice as it relates to the closing day. Now, the reality is, if you have eyes on the ground, you can see the property, you'll have a pretty good idea of when it's going to deliver. If you're communicating with the sales staff, construction, you'll know, okay, we're plus or minus a month, 2 months here. They only have to give you 10 days notice for an actual settlement date. 10B, this is also something really interesting. This says they have 2 years to complete the property. This sometimes freaks clients out. They want the home obviously a lot sooner, or maybe they're promised a delivery date earlier. But the contract says, you know what? Yes, it's in the builder's best interest to deliver the home as quickly as possible. But this says that they have 2 years contractually to deliver the property to you. There's also a caveat there. If within those 2 years, there is an act of God, something out of the control, some sort of delay that prevents your home from being worked on, that gets added on to the 2 years. So let's say 6 months in, there's a hurricane and it knocks the house over and they got to start from scratch. They now have 2 years and 6 months to deliver your home without having to give you a deposit back or without giving you the option to cancel. If they can't deliver your home within 2 years, then the seller is now holding up their part of the deal and then they could be in default. Number 11, super important paragraph. I don't know why they bold some paragraphs and don't bold others. Number 11 is bold. It is important. This says they will give you a 10-year structural warranty, and the warranty packet is something that we'll go over in a separate videos in detail. But there's 2 sentences in this paragraph that I reference all the time when it comes to sort of quality of construction and if there's a dispute with the builder in terms of our expectations and what they're telling us. So in number 11, if you go down to number 1, I'll give you an example. We had our pre-drywall inspection. There was a crack in the foundation. Builder said it was fine. It was a normal crack, not a big deal. We obviously felt different. We were really concerned with it. So we went back to this paragraph and it says, free from structural defects so as it as to pass without objection in the trade. So what does that mean? If we had someone in the trade say, hey, you know what? That's actually not okay. Then they would have to address it. And that's exactly what we did. We found an independent structural engineer, take a look at it, give us the report. Then we worked on a remedy. Sometimes you'll walk into a home and you think, oh man, that just looks like crap. Or who laid that tile? Or why is it off center? Sometimes things just don't look right. Or you can just tell it's not done well. That's called workmanlike manner. A lot of times that's really subjective. Some people are really hard to make happy, but it's not unusual that you walk into your home, you're like, wait a second, why is the tile off center? Why is there 6 inches on this side and 9 inches on this side with regards to the molding? You know, stuff like that happens all the time. And again, sometimes the builder will say, you know what, that's just the way it is. Then we go to sentence number 2 here. It says, constructed in a workmanlike manner as to pass without objection in the trade. So in an instance where there was tile laid in a primary shower off center, the builder said, we're not ripping out the entire shower just because it's off center. We had a tradesman come in and say, no, workmanlike manner says that you are to measure from the center out versus from outside in, which is what happened in this particular home. In the end, they ripped out the entire shower and started over. And we use this paragraph in those last 2 examples. So really important. All right, number 12, arbitration. This entire paragraph basically says you two agree not to sue each other should there be a dispute. You will go to arbitration. Here's exactly how that will work. Here's what you need to do. And here's what they'll do. No one wants to sue anyone. It's not fun. Number 13 says, any delays in your selections may cause a delay in construction. At some point, if you're causing a delay in construction or delivery of the home, builder has the right to make selections for you. Make your selections. Number 14 is community by community. Some communities have what's called protective covenants, which is different than an HOA. You might not have an HOA, but there still might be covenants on a property that have restrictions. And some of these restrictions can be related to swimming pools, tennis court signs, boats, trailers, animals, that sort of thing. Don't assume because you don't have an HOA that you can do whatever you want. Covenants work very similar to HOA, but they're actually recorded with a deed. Number 15 says, hey, this may or may not be part of an HOA. And if it is part of an HOA, here are some of the things that are governed by the HOA, and you should be aware. And then we'll get into sort of the HOA documents here in a moment. Also, a lot of times they just send these contracts to you via DocuSign. You just sort of sign mindlessly and not read everything. But if you look about 2/3 of the way down in paragraph 15, you'll see a $2,000 one-time capital contribution fee collected at closing. That money goes into the reserves and working capital of the brand new HOA in that neighborhood. Only the first owner of each property pays that $2,000 into the sort of coffers. Now that number may change over the lifetime of the construction. They might be 2/3 of the way done through construction and decide, oh, wait a second, we don't have enough money. New owners from now on have to pay this much more, or it could go the other way. But it's a community specific number, and you don't want a $2,000 surprise at settlement. So you want to know what that is. Number 16 says, if anyone that works on a property files a mechanics lien after you settle, a contractor has 90 days to file a lien on your property. So if they do work, let's say the week of your closing, they still have 3 months while you own the home to file a mechanics lien. This paragraph says the toll pros will work closely with you to help remove it and not cause you any liability or penalty. Number 17 says no oral statements or promises. Everything has to be in writing. Hugely important, especially in these sort of long sales processes where it takes a while to get something under contract. Number 18, visitation of property. This is actually one of the more liberal takes on visiting the property. As long as you get permission, you go during working hours and you wear a hard hat, you can visit the property almost as often as you want. You can go every day. The purpose of visiting the property is sort of monitor the work, check on progress, that sort of thing. You're not allowed to bring contractors, do any work on your own. No children under the age of 16 are allowed in any area at any time. But I think there's exceptions. Number 19, radon. This paragraph says, once you move in, you have the right to do a radon test within 60 days. If radon is found above the EPA action level, Toll Brothers will come in and install a radon mitigation unit. They may decide to test on their own, but it's up to you to actually do the radon test, and they won't remind you. But if you have radon in your home that needs to be remediated, Toll will do it for you within those first 60 days of you owning the home. Number 20, email authorization. Sending an email is the same thing as getting something in writing. Some miscellaneous provisions. Everything here is in this contract. A. B. This is not being recorded, so it's not public record. C. This agreement shall be binding upon your respective heirs and successors. So, God forbid. Really important sentence in here. Buyer may not transfer, sell, or assign this agreement. Early on in the real estate boom, when real estate prices were going through the roof, folks were actually assigning their contract to new buyers and just taking profit. You're not allowed to do that here. You know what you're buying, is what D says. And it's all laid out in the addendums. This buyer's obligation to pay the entire purchase price of any extras, and closing costs shall survive closing. So in the event you go to closing, they don't collect all the money for whatever reason, just because you settle, you're still on the hook. F, until closing, seller shall assume risk risk of loss. That means if the house burns down the day before settlement, it is the seller's responsibility, not yours. G said there's a affiliated business disclosure. We'll go over that soon. H says that you will work with the seller to sign any additional documents as needed, and vice versa. I, this is a good one. Even if you're buying the property with more than one party, it only takes one person's signature to create a binding agreement. Make sure you trust your significant other or whoever you're buying the property with, because only they have to sign off on any changes, not both of you. J, choice of settlement agent. This is a state law. You are able to choose your own settlement agent. However, there's a caveat. This is not in the contract, and they may or may not tell you this. If you settle with an outside title company not owned by Toll Brothers, they will not give you the keys to your home until they actually have the funds in their bank account. And in Virginia, it can take up to 48 business hours before funds are actually transferred from settlement company to seller. And until that happens, they're going to hold on to their keys. So you may settle on a Friday, but not actually get access to the house till Tuesday. However, if you settle with their mortgage company, they'll waive that. They'll give you the keys at closing because they know the money's coming. Usually it's easier just to settle with their company as long as the fees are comparable. And that's it. That's the agreement of sale. So now we'll get into the addendums. These next few pages are just instructions on how to submit deposits. Breakdown of the deposit: 5% of base price, 5% of lot premium, 20% of structural options. And I really like having a visual representation of all the structural options that you are putting in the home. And that's what we did here. You have your affiliated business arrangement. In short, TBI and Westminster Title are owned by Toll Brothers. When you use them, they can profit. We'll get into the title company stuff here in a bit. Okay, this one's important. In this community and most communities, a lot of builders started using these endorsements after the 2008 crash. This says that you will not sell their home during your first year of ownership. But if you do sell the home during your first year of ownership, they can't stop you. They are entitled to 5% of the sales price, not the profit, of the sales price. There are exceptions. We'll go over that here in a moment. The idea is they want to sell to owner occupants. Communities that have a higher percentage of owner occupants tend to hold their value better. And more importantly, they don't want to compete with you should they still be selling in the neighborhood a year from now. The last thing they want is resale competition. And then it goes into the exceptions. The exceptions include the death of a buyer, divorce, mandatory job transfer, and a medical or financial emergency. I've had clients actually be in a position where they did have a financial or medical emergency, and we had to either cancel a contract or immediately sell it once they settled. They also allow transfers of the property, but there are restrictions. You can transfer it to a spouse, you can transfer it into a trust, you can transfer it to another family member, but you can't transfer it to someone else for a monetary gain or like an off-market sale or something like that. And if you do, they're still entitled to 5% of whatever the perceived sales price was. And if you do transfer it to a spouse or a family member, they are still beholden to the 1-year rule. They can't turn around and sell it. It sticks with the property for 1 year. In the past, this used to actually be a deed restriction, but now it's just a contract restriction. All right. So they go on to say no unreasonable restraint. The idea is not to punish you or make you live in a home you don't want. The idea is to protect the value of the home that you're buying. That's pretty much what that paragraph says. Our next endorsement is an environmental disclosure that's specific to this community. So this neighborhood was part of a larger tract of land, approximately 125 acres. It was formerly used as a laboratory for testing agrochemicals, pharmaceuticals, and food additives from 1946 to 2012. In 2002, they did detect the groundwater wasn't any good. That's pretty much the whole gist of this entire addendum. They took all the appropriate steps to remediate the land. The community is served by public water. No use of groundwater is really required or necessary or allowed, actually. There is no alarm system in the home. There is an airport close by, and it gets loud. People get really surprised when they realize how loud a flight path can be. If you are buying near an airport, it's really important to understand the flight paths of that airport. Being a couple blocks away can make a huge difference when you're talking about big jets flying overhead. International flights, local flights, it really does matter. So this disclosure tells you, hey, there's an airport nearby. You might want to check it out. Exterior selections. Brochure renderings are just used for illustrative purposes, and what you end up with might look different. School boundaries can change. They have nothing to do with it. Tree removal. This is a big one. No lot owner may remove live trees with a diameter in excess of 4 inches. It's really important to know when you are walking lots, hey, what trees will they take down? What trees will they keep up? But just understanding how much of your lot will be usable, if it will restrict any future plans for a pool, patio, whatever it might be. This gives you an idea of what to look for. Street trees, there'll be trees in the community. Every lot has utility easements. If you tint your windows, it'll avoid the warranty. Driveways may encroach common areas or off your property. So basically, sometimes driveways go into the street. You don't own the street. That's what it says. Any landscape selections you make must be made within 90 days of the contract. Frankly, I'm not a big fan of having the builder put in patios, decks, anything along those lines. It's really hard to optimize that process. And you end up working with designers over Zoom and offsite. You get more bang for your buck if you do it after closing. This lets you know that the property is part of a POA or property owners association or homeowners association. Generally, you have 3 days from the time that you receive the HOA docs to cancel the contract with no penalty. In some communities, the HOA docs aren't ready when they start selling, but this law just says, so if you're buying in that community, as long as they tell you, hey, there's going to be an HOA, we do not have HOA documents yet, the 3-day period still applies despite not having any documents. So obviously, there's some risk there. The homes in this neighborhood are prototypes, which means that they haven't built them before at scale. And a lot of times when they build a home on paper versus on site, things can go sideways. The Virginia Residential Property Disclosure Act, this is a state law that says if the builder is aware of any material or latent defects or violations on the property from a governing body, they must disclose. So that's standard actually on all properties in Virginia. Your next endorsement, hand of house. The hand of house is basically what side of the home is the garage. Sometimes you'll walk into a model home, you'll love that floor plan, you'll buy that floor plan, but the lot that you pick requires it to be reversed. So if you walk into the model, the garage is on the right, living's on the left. That same floor plan could have the garage on the left and living on the right. Usually you know what you're getting at time of contract, but this addendum says if they need to change it, they have the right to do it, whether you like it or not. Inspection. Toll Brothers is actually super lenient with their inspection guidelines. In short, you can have an inspection whenever you want, as long as it's within business hours with an inspector that is insured and licensed with permission ahead of time. Usually you get an inspection right before your drywall meeting and right before closing. You might not be satisfied with something you're seeing on the property. There are lots of reasons to get a third-party inspection throughout the building process, and this allows you to do that. This next endorsement addresses a very common question. Is there an appraisal contingency? In essence, what happens if the home appraises for less than the sales price? This endorsement says you're on the hook for the sales price despite the appraised value. The reason they do this is because ultimately you can spend as much money as you want at the design center or on structural options, whether it makes sense financially or whether it's worth it. They're saying it doesn't matter. Go nuts. But ultimately, you're on the hook for the sales price despite the appraised value. And there is an art to getting the home to appraise for the contract price, and you should use some common sense with regards to how much you are spending on design center options and structural options. It's really easy to overspend or over-improve a home. All right, so we have our first Exhibit B. This first Exhibit B are all the things that are included in addition to the standard options at no additional cost. We have the lot premium here at $81,000. They're giving us a finished basement, a few other options, an additional 1-car garage. So here are all the things that they're adding to the property, and they're charging us $0. So this next B, here are all the structural options that the buyers selected, what they cost, and what that equates to in terms of the deposit, which is 20%. I always like to keep these option sheets handy because it's not unusual that I'll visit a community several times over the course of several years, and I like to track where option prices are. Have they gone up? Have they come down? And what's the true cost, the true value of what we're buying right now? Another Exhibit B, just more options. Here you have a grand total of $300,000 with a $60,000 deposit required at time of contract, which is about 15% of the sales price. And that sounds about right, just in terms of the structural options. They didn't go nuts or anything, just what it costs. Okay, then you have your first Exhibit C. This is where you're getting credits or things are coming off the contract. So give me a credit for iron balusters. They give me a credit for the 1-car for an additional 2-car garage, and they're giving us a $10,000 incentive if we use TBI Mortgage Company. If you don't use TBI Mortgage Company per the contract, they do not have to give you this $10,000. However, I've been successful several times in getting the builder to honor this subsidy, even when we use a different lender. There's a lot of different ways to go about doing it, and it's not guaranteed, but don't let this deter you from shopping rates and making sure you're getting the best deal possible. Exhibit D are all the standard specifications in the house, standard options in the home. Our next exhibit, this property is zoned R1, public streets. There are lots of easements on the property, including sanitary easements, sewer easements that just exist, storm drainage easements, all sort of very boilerplate language, but then it does get really specific once you get down to 18. So in this particular neighborhood, there are 3 different sewer types, and there are definitely better and worse in terms of the type of sewer you get in your home. Some require backup generators, some require grinder pumps in the yard, which can be unattractive. And this lets you know what lot has what type of sewer system. Again, a question that's never really asked. You don't ever really talk about it during the entire sales process, but then you get to the contract and say, oh yeah, by the way, this home has a grinder pump, or this home has public sewer. And you think, okay, but there are some consequences to that. Outlots or outlots throughout the community. Some outlots are basically mosquito pits. It's really important to know where the outlots are and how they are going to look relative to your lot. And if none are available, you can ask, do you have any pictures of what the outlot will look like? Are there any other neighborhoods where there's an outlot that I can visit? Because if you are going to live next to an outlot, you really want to know what is going to be happening there. Resource protection areas, or RPAs, exist throughout this neighborhood. Some neighborhoods don't have any of them. RPAs in Northern Virginia are really strict. Basically, that land cannot be disturbed by the builder or the homeowner. So you might have an acre of property, but if half of it is on an RPA, you cannot disturb that land. You can't cut down trees. It's really restrictive. Some neighborhoods have lots of RPA areas. Some have none, but you want to know, okay, exactly where is the RPA on my lot and what does it look like today? Because that's what I'm going to have to look at for the next 20 years. Room dimensions and brochures might be different than actual dimensions. It's really important to actually look at detailed plans and blueprints. They won't give those to you, but if you ask, you can see them in the model. The location of the house. The location of the house in terms of which direction it's going to face, at what angle, where it's going to be placed on the lot. You should have a pretty good idea at the time of contract. But this says they can change it if they need to. And I've seen it happen many, many times. And why this is important is because you want to have a voice in that conversation. If they say, hey, you know what? We're going to have to move your house over 6 feet forward and 2 feet back. Don't just accept that by default. Make sure you understand, are there any other options? Is this the best possible scenario? Is it going to affect my daylight, my views? What if we went 2 feet back and 6 feet to the side? I don't know. But the idea is that you want to be part of that conversation because there are often options. Sometimes they'll take the path of least resistance, but if you're involved, you'll have a much better chance of getting what you want. Individual lots will be cleared of trees. They might install retaining walls. Homes completed after November 1st will not have grass or finished driveways. So you'll still settle, but they'll come back in the spring and finish. Mailboxes. You may have a mailbox or you may not. It's really important to understand that you're going to have to walk to a mailbox or have one at your home. And that's all your sort of miscellaneous disclosures there. Then you have a site plan, select your hardware. This really affects all your decisions moving forward. So minor, but it's really important. This says you'll have 4 appointments at Design Studio. If you don't make your selections within those 4 appointments, they reserve the right to make the selections for you. This also says they don't want more than 2 people at Design Center appointments. The idea is they want to be efficient and effective. But if you ask ahead of time, they will often let you bring a third party in, whether it's a designer, an agent, a friend. Don't let this restrict you if you have options. All right, this one's a good one. You might walk into a model home like, oh, wow, I want this house. I'm going to build it just like this. So this says, hey, here's everything in a model home that you can have that we will offer. But here's everything in the model home that's decorative, custom, and it's not an option that you can select whether at the design center or a contract. And a lot of people are surprised because they fall in love with the model home. They want a lot of those same options. All right, you're just signing off on all those documents you received. This is the note that I mentioned earlier on. So in addition to your deposit, you are also signing a promissory note. This note is due at settlement, or if they say you're in default and send you notice, not only are you at risk of losing your initial deposit, they have the right to come after your note. And the idea is that you'll have more skin in the game. I'm not saying it's easy to walk away from $100,000 or whatever 5% of the sales price is, but it's a lot harder to walk away from 10%. This is acknowledgement that you received the warranty information, which they generally give separately. And this is just them trying to sell you an alarm system. They'll install it for free, but you have to agree to a 3-year contract. No thanks. That is the Toll Brothers contract in Northern Virginia. I think a lot of it will apply nationwide, especially the agreement of sale. Hopefully you found some value. If you have any questions about your contract, or if you're thinking about buying a home, DC, Maryland, or Virginia, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help. All right. Have a great day.